When we talk about a failure in the engine coolant temperature measurement on the dashboard, we can find some variations that we have to initially distinguish, since some cars will have a special sensor for the dashboard and another for the injection computer. Other cars will only have one sensor that will work for everything, and there will be other cars that will have an engine coolant temperature sensor, and will also have a switch, but that switch is not a sensor, but rather a switch that the system will use for the electric fans. So, we had said that not all systems work the same way, not all will have only one sensor or two sensors. So, to explain in general terms how the different systems will work, I already have these drawings here. Here I have the engine, I have the instrument panel and the injection computer. And as I mentioned, in some systems we will only have one engine coolant temperature sensor. So, when it is only one sensor, the sensor is connected to the computer. So, this sensor will communicate to the computer the temperature of the engine coolant. The sensor will be connected somewhere around the engine block. The computer will use the information from the sensor to activate the fans. It will send a signal to the fan relay so that they turn on and off depending on the information provided by the sensor. In the same way, the computer will be connected to the instrument panel so that our indicator on the dashboard can give us the readings and we can know the temperature of the engine. And in a scenario like this, if the sensor or the wiring that goes from the sensor to the computer fails, the electric fans will not work and our temperature indicator on the instrument panel will not work properly either. So, for example, if we use a scanner and enter the engine coolant temperature data, we will realize that there are incorrect values and that basically, here on the scanner, we cannot have adequate readings of the engine coolant. So, in a scanner where the temperature gauge doesn't work, here on the dashboard and we insert the scanner. So, in the scanner we see that there are no correct readings, the problem is most likely in the sensor or in the wiring. And if on the contrary we have correct readings, then it is most likely that we have a problem in the wiring from the computer to the dashboard or we have a problem in the dashboard itself. That way we can quickly realize where the fault is if we use the live data on the scanner. Before deleting this example, there is a variant that I have seen in some Chevrolet trucks from the 90s, is that in some systems, in the same way, there will only be one sensor, but that sensor, instead of having two cables, one of 5 volts and another of ground, we will have a third cable and that third cable will go from the same sensor connected to the dashboard. That is another variant that we can find. Another variant that we can find and is quite common are those systems where there are going to be two engine coolant temperature sensors. We are going to have the engine coolant temperature sensor and we are going to have another one that is known as the sending unit or the sender unit. And in these types of systems, the engine coolant temperature sensor is going to be for the computer. The computer is going to control the fans, among other things, with the information from this sensor, and the sending unit or the sender unit is going to be directly for what is the instrument panel. And in that case, when what is the instrument panel fails, the indicator on the instrument panel and we insert the scanner, it is very likely that the scanner will have correct temperature readings, even if the readings here on the instrument panel are incorrect. And in those cases, the main suspect is going to be the sensor or the sensor wiring. Generally, when we have these two sensors, this sensor is going to have two cables, a power supply and a ground direct from the computer. And the sending unit or sensor that is for the dashboard will usually only have one cable and the ground is connected to the housing, since it is obviously connected to the engine block. So, as I mentioned, the problem is usually the sensor, sometimes the wiring, since, as it is only one cable, many times that cable disconnects very easily from here. Sometimes it has false contact, sometimes it is damaged, or the connection is already very loose, and that is usually what causes problems with the temperature gauge on the dashboard. So, in addition, we are going to have another scenario. It is important to mention it so that we do not get confused. And these are those systems where there is only one engine coolant temperature sensor that goes to the computer. The computer sends information to the dashboard, but there will also be a thermal switch, and that thermal switch is what will control the fans or directly the radiator fan of the engine cooling system. So, in those cases, there is no need to get confused, since this one here is not going to be a sensor, but rather a switch. And that switch is basically a thermal switch, which, when the engine coolant temperature reaches certain values close to the normal operating temperature, which can be around 80 to 90 C, when it reaches that temperature, the switch will close and what it will do is bridge the ground, which will first of all reach a relay and from there, well, the engine coolant radiator fan will be activated. So, those are the variations that we can have in general terms with respect to the different systems.